From decorated Delta Force commander to despised inmate, Major Leon Carter was a man forged in fire, now trapped in a perma, framed by a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of power. Inside the brutal walls of Blackstone Penitentiary, he faces not just a wrongful sentence, but a system designed to crush his spirit, led by a warden determined to break him. But a silent weapon can be the most dangerous. This is the silent weapon Delta Force behind bars. The air in Blackstone Penitentiary was a suffocating blend of stale sweat, disinfectant, and the metallic tang of unspoken despair. It clung to Major Leon Carter, a constant, unwanted shroud, a stark contrast to the crisp, clean oxygen of the battlefield where he once commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Now, in this concrete tomb, he was merely inmate 734, a black man stripped of his medals, his honor, and his freedom, all by a system designed to crush spirits, especially those that dared to defy. His very presence, a former Delta Force commander reduced to a number, was a calculated affront to the ideals he once championed. Warden Travis Hale, a man whose pale eyes held the cold, calculating glint of a predator, watched Leon from a distance, a smirk playing on his thin lips. Hale embodied the systemic rot that had ensnared Leon, a man who saw racial bias as a tool, not a flaw. He relished the public degradation of those he deemed inferior, a cruel tradition deeply embedded in the history of incarceration. Leon's arrival, a decorated black soldier falsely accused of treason and complicity in an illegal arms trafficking ring, was a personal challenge to Hale's entrenched prejudices. The official charges against Leon were a smokescreen, meticulously crafted by unseen hands to bury a truth far more sinister than any public knew: a high-level government conspiracy to flood international black markets with untraceable weaponry. Leon had stumbled upon it, and for that, he became a convenient, high-profile scapegoat. His past as a leader, a man of integrity, made his fall all the more satisfying for those who sought to maintain the shadow economy of power and weapons. The mess hall, typically a cacophony of clanking trays and hushed, guttural conversations, fell into an unsettling silence as Leon entered. It was lunch, the designated hour of the day when the thin veneer of order often frayed into raw displays of dominance. Warden Hale had orchestrated this moment with precise, malicious intent. As Leon approached the serving line, a burly, tattooed guard, Officer Miller, stepped forward, blocking his path. Miller's gaze was laced with a contempt that went beyond simple professional disdain. It was the raw, unfiltered animosity Hale had carefully cultivated among his most loyal enforcers. 734, Miller drawled, his voice thick with exaggerated disdain. Word is, you ain't cut from the same cloth as the rest of us. Fancy military man. I heard you were some kind of hero. Funny how heroes end up in the same pigsty as the rest of the garbage. A ripple of murmurs snaked through the mess hall, the collective intake of breath from inmates who understood the unspoken rules of this brutal place. Leon's jaw tightened, but his expression remained a mask of hardened indifference. He had faced down armed insurgents and navigated treacherous diplomatic minefields. This was a different kind of war, fought with psychological blows rather than bullets. Move, officer, Leon stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of emotion. I'm here for my meal. Miller's smirk widened, revealing a chipped tooth. He took another step closer, his body language a deliberate invasion of personal space. Or what? Major, you gonna salute me? Tell me about all the bad guys you caught, or maybe you'll tell us about the real bad guys, the ones who threw you in here with the rest of the trash, the ones who look just like you on paper but ain't got a drop of honor in their veins. The implication, thick with racial undertones, hung heavy in the air. Hale, watching from a raised platform at the back of the hall, leaned forward, a satisfied glint in his eyes. He had fanned the flames of racial animosity, knowing it would ignite a volatile response within the prison's already fractured inmate population. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the hall as a tray, seemingly knocked by accident, crashed to the floor near Leon's feet. It was a signal from the tables. Members of the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist gang that thrived under Hale's tacit approval, began to jeer. Their taunts were laced with racial slurs, designed to provoke, to strip Leon of his composure, to remind him of his place. They called him a traitor to his own kind, a government dog, their voices rising in a crescendo of manufactured outrage. It was a well-rehearsed performance, orchestrated to perfection by Hale. Leon's eyes, normally sharp and piercing, flickered across the faces of the jeering inmates. He saw the hatred, the fear, and the calculated manipulation. He knew this wasn't random. It was a deliberate, public execution of his reputation, designed to break him before he even began to understand the true depths of the conspiracy. He remembered the whispered threat from one of his captors during his interrogation. "You fight us, Carter, and we'll make sure you lose everything, even your own name." Miller, emboldened by the rising tension, extended a hand, his fingers brushing Leon's chest. "You think you're special. Major, you ain't nothing but another piece of property in my house. And in this house, we don't serve your kind of hero. Not anymore." The implication was clear. Leon was not only a prisoner, but a black man being actively diminished by a white authority figure in front of a captive audience. Leon's muscles tensed, a primal urge to retaliate surging through him. But his Delta Force training, honed over years of disciplined combat, held him in check. He was a weapon, yes, but he knew when to choose his battles. To react now would be to play directly into Hale's hand, to give him the excuse he desperately sought to escalate the humiliation into physical violence, a common tactic to keep prisoners in line. The goal was to prove that even a decorated soldier could be brought to his knees, that his past glory meant nothing in the face of absolute power. He slowly, deliberately, sidestepped Miller, his eyes never leaving the officer's face. The movement was fluid, economical, a testament to his suppressed power. "You're mistaken, officer. I'm not a hero. I'm a man falsely imprisoned. And unlike you, I still have my honor." The words, delivered with quiet intensity, cut through the manufactured noise. A few of the jeering inmates shifted uncomfortably. They had expected an outburst, a fight, anything that would validate their prejudice. Leon's calm defiance, his unwavering gaze, stripped them of their power. He was a symbol of unyielding strength, even in degradation. Hale's face, however, contorted slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. Leon's refusal to break, to succumb to the public baiting, was an unexpected affront. He had wanted a spectacle, a public capitulation. Instead, he got quiet strength. Miller, momentarily thrown off balance by Leon's composure, regained his footing. He snatched a discarded, half-eaten tray from a nearby table, the greasy remnants of food sloshing precariously. "Here, Major," he sneered, thrusting the tray at Leon. "This is what we serve to traitors." The stench of lukewarm, congealed slop wafted up. It was a deliberate act of contempt, designed to shame and disgust. The entire mess hall watched, a silent jury. Leon looked at the tray, then back at Miller. The humiliation was palpable, a heavy weight in the oppressive air. This was the moment of public disgrace, a stark reminder of his current station. But in his eyes, there was no shame, only a deep, burning resolve. He knew this was just the beginning of a long, brutal fight. He also knew that this orchestrated humiliation, this public stripping of his dignity, was merely the first move in a much larger, more dangerous game. The true battle lay not just within the prison walls, but against the hidden architects of his downfall. He would endure, he would fight, and he would expose the truth. The stench of the mess hall, a blend of stale food and institutional cleaner, momentarily dissipated, replaced by the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear. Leon's mind, a finely tuned instrument of combat and strategy, recoiled from the present, plunging him into the cold, sterile memory of a high-security black site. It was not a prison then. but a cage, a temporary holding cell where the walls seemed to breathe with the lies they were constructing around him. The memory of Officer Miller's sneer, the public humiliation, was a dull echo against the sharp, searing pain of betrayal. He saw Commander David Thorne's face, etched with a false sympathy that now seemed grotesquely theatrical. Thorne, his trusted superior, had stood before him, the very man who had personally vouched for Leon throughout his illustrious career. "Leon," Thorne had said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "you're caught in a mess, son, a real mess. We both know you're innocent, but the evidence, it's overwhelming." Leon had stared, unblinking, as Thorne outlined the fabricated charges, complicity in a vast international arms trafficking ring, selling military-grade weapons to hostile foreign entities. Each word was a dagger, twisting deeper into the core of his integrity. The truth, raw and unyielding, flashed in his mind. It began innocuously enough, during an unsanctioned intel-gathering operation in the desolate stretches of the Syrian border. Leon's team, off the books and deep undercover, had stumbled upon more than just insurgent activity. They found a clandestine network, a meticulously organized pipeline funneling American-made precision weaponry to groups that should never have had access to it. These weren't rogue operatives. The logistics, the high-level security clearances, the sheer volume of material pointed to an inside job, a betrayal at the highest echelons of power. Leon had documented everything, a digital breadcrumb trail leading straight to a shadowy syndicate with deep roots in the government and military-industrial complex. He had compiled a dossier, a ticking time bomb of evidence, and dispatched it through secure channels, trusting Thorne to escalate it to the appropriate authorities. Instead, the response was swift and brutal. Not an investigation, but a takedown. Leon's team was ambushed, their data wiped, their mission records conveniently lost. He was the sole survivor, captured not by enemy forces, but by his own. Cloaked operatives moving with chilling precision. They subjected him to days of relentless interrogation, not seeking truth, but seeking to break him, to force a confession that would validate their fabricated narrative. They didn't want to know about the conspiracy, they wanted to erase his knowledge of it. He remembered the sterile interrogation room, the single harsh light, the relentless questioning that circled the truth without ever touching it. "Confess, Major, and we can make this easier. Fight us, and you'll disappear. And worse, your family will pay the price." It was the mention of his family, the silent threat against his elderly mother and younger sister. That truly struck him. His military training had prepared him for physical torture, for psychological warfare, but not for the cold, calculated manipulation of his deepest vulnerabilities. He had refused to confess to a crime he didn't commit, but he had also understood the futility of an outright, immediate struggle. He was isolated, his communications cut, his carefully gathered evidence vanished. They had anticipated his every move, every attempt to expose them. That realization, the profound understanding of how deeply embedded this conspiracy was, how thoroughly they had prepared to silence him, had been a revelation. They weren't just framing him, they were sending a message. Fighting back then, in that confined room, with the lives of his loved ones hanging in the balance, would have been a suicide mission. A noble but ultimately futile act of defiance that would have buried the truth with him. He had chosen silence not out of surrender, but out of strategic necessity. He knew that the only way to truly fight them was to survive, to endure their immediate onslaught, and to find a way to expose them from within the very system they used to entrap him. His endurance in that interrogation room, the unwavering refusal to break despite threats and deprivation, had been a calculated gamble. He had given them nothing substantial. No false confession, no names, just a blank wall of defiance. They had wanted a quick resolution, a public scapegoat. His silence, his resilience, had forced them to resort to their more elaborate, public framing operation. He knew they needed a high-profile traitor to deter others who might stumble upon their illicit dealings. The public humiliation in the mess hall was merely an extension of that initial betrayal, a new layer of control and psychological warfare. Hale, the unwitting pawn, or perhaps a willing participant, was merely executing the next phase of the plan. They wanted to strip him of his dignity, to break his spirit, so that even if he somehow managed to get word out, his words would be dismissed as the ravings of a broken man. Leon's eyes, as he looked at the congealed slop on the tray Miller offered, held the weight of that past. He saw not just food, but the elaborate, venomous trap laid for him. His composure wasn't a sign of weakness, but a testament to his unbreakable will. He had chosen endurance because he understood that the fight wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon of attrition. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. Every taunt, every demeaning act, every attempt to break him was, in his mind, another piece of the puzzle he would eventually put together to bring down the architects of his downfall. He would play their game, for now, enduring the public humiliation, because he knew that true victory lay not in immediate retaliation, but in the methodical, strategic dismantling of their entire corrupt operation. He was a survivor, a weapon waiting for the opportune moment to strike, and his silence was his most potent shield. The days bled into weeks, each one a monotonous cycle of clanging steel doors, echoing shouts, and the pervasive sense of confinement. Major Leon Carter moved through Blackstone Penitentiary like a phantom. His presence acknowledged but rarely engaged, a calculated indifference that both frustrated and intrigued Warden Hale. Leon adhered strictly to the prison rules, performing his assigned labor in the laundry room with silent efficiency, eating his meager meals without complaint, and participating in the mandatory yard time with a detached observance. This quiet compliance, however, was not acceptance. It was camouflage. He was living normally, or as normally as one could within the walls of a maximum security prison. But every interaction, every task, was an exercise in covert observation. Hale, growing increasingly agitated by Leon's unyielding composure, recognized this stoicism not as defeat, but as a strategic retreat. The public humiliation in the mess hall had failed to break him. It had merely hardened his resolve. So, the warden shifted tactics, moving from overt attacks to a more insidious form of systemic abuse, a constant, low-level pressure designed to chip away at Leon's mental and physical resilience. It was psychological warfare, meticulously orchestrated to isolate him and exacerbate the already harsh realities of prison life. The first manifestation was the constant cell inspections. Officer Miller, seemingly omnipresent, would conduct random searches of Leon's cell 3, sometimes 4 times a day. Each time, his meager belongings were tossed, his bed overturned, his precious few books donated by a benevolent chaplain before Hale's stricter policies rifled through. Nothing was ever found, but the message was clear: there was no privacy, no sanctuary, no moment of true peace. Leon would simply remake his bed, restack his books, and continue his quiet observations, his face betraying nothing. The other inmates, accustomed to the guard's whims, would watch, some with apathetic disinterest, others with a knowing glance that acknowledged the warden's targeted harassment. Next came the denial of basic necessities. When a shipment of new, warmer blankets arrived for the winter, Leon's cell was mysteriously overlooked. His requests for a new toothbrush, a fresh bar of soap, or even a pen to write a letter to his family were met with blank stares or vague promises that never materialized. The library, a small, dusty room that offered a temporary escape for many, was suddenly under renovation whenever Leon tried to access it. These were minor indignities, seemingly insignificant on their own, but accumulated. They were a relentless barrage, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. The most insidious tactic, however, involved the inmate population. Hale subtly manipulated the prison's delicate social hierarchy, leveraging the existing racial tensions and power dynamics among the gangs. He spread rumors, fueled misinformation, and provided preferential treatment to those who would target Leon, not with direct violence, but with social ostracism and petty harassment. The Aryan Brotherhood, emboldened by Hale's tacit approval, made Leon's life a living hell. They would accidentally trip him in the yard, misplace his laundry items, or ensure he was the last to receive his food, leaving him with only the scraps. One afternoon in the recreation yard, Leon was performing his usual solitary calisthenics, a routine he maintained to keep his Delta Force physique honed. However minimally, a group of Aryan Brotherhood members, led by a hulking inmate named Hammer, approached. Hammer had a reputation for brutality and an unquestioning loyalty to Hale, whose favoritism extended to him in extra commissary privileges. "Look at the major, fellas," Hammer sneered, his voice loud enough to carry across the yard. "Still playing soldier boy. You ain't no soldier in here. You're just another piece of trash. And a traitor. To boot." His cronies laughed, a harsh, grating sound. They formed a loose semicircle around Leon, subtly cutting off his escape route. There was no direct threat, no fist raised, but the unspoken menace was palpable. This was their game: intimidation, psychological torment. Leon knew this was a calculated move by Hale, designed to show him that even within the inmate population, he had no allies, no refuge. Leon straightened up, his movements fluid despite the years of confinement. He looked at Hammer, his gaze unwavering, devoid of fear or anger. "Your words mean nothing here, Hammer," Leon said, his voice calm, controlled. "And your master's strings are showing." Hammer's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his brutish features. Leon had seen past the facade, directly to Hale's manipulation. The comment hit a nerve. Hammer lunged forward, not to strike, but to invade Leon's personal space, to force a reaction. He deliberately bumped Leon's shoulder, a calculated provocation. "You think you're smart, huh?" "Major," Hammer snarled, his breath foul. "You think you can play games in here? We'll see how smart you are when you're eating off the floor." Or worse. Leon stood his ground, his muscles taut, ready to respond to any physical escalation, but still holding back. His eyes scanned the yard, noticing the other inmates watching, some with morbid curiosity, others with a flicker of respect for his composure. This was a chess match, and Hale was playing his pawns. Leon's goal was to expose the king. He had to endure this systematic assault, to allow the abuse to continue, because every act of discrimination, every covert attack, was building a case, a pattern of behavior that would eventually expose the corrupt system. He needed evidence, and the only way to get it was to let them continue to reveal their hand. He knew the risks. He knew they wanted him to break, to lash out, to give them a reason to escalate the violence. But he also knew that his survival depended on his ability to remain a ghost in the machine, observing, absorbing, and waiting for the precise moment to strike. The daily grind, the constant harassment, was merely another training exercise, preparing him for the ultimate fight, the air in the prison library, usually a sanctuary of hushed whispers and turning pages, was thick with orchestrated tension. Warden Hale, ever the puppet master, had subtly altered the library's schedule, ensuring that Leon's assigned time slot often overlapped with that of the Aryan Brotherhood. It was another calculated move, a low-stakes skirmish designed to chip away at Leon's calm. Today, the intimidation escalated. Hammer, flanked by two of his hulking lieutenants, blocked the aisle where Leon stood, his eyes scanning the spines of worn books. "Looking for a fairy tale?" "Major," Hammer sneered, his voice a gravelly rumble that reverberated off the metal shelves. "Something about heroes ain't no heroes in here. Just rats." His cronies snickered, their bulky forms radiating menace. Leon held a tattered copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a text he found ironically relevant to his current predicament. He looked up, his gaze steady, meeting Hammer's hostile stare without flinching. The systemic abuse had become a constant, an irritating hum beneath the surface of his existence, but it had not broken him. Instead, it had sharpened his focus, reinforcing his understanding of the game Hale was playing. Some seek truth in stories. Hammer, Leon replied, his voice calm, measured. Others seek only to obscure it. His words, delivered with quiet conviction, carried a subtle sting. Hammer's smirk wavered slightly, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing his face. He thrived on raw aggression, on predictable outbursts, and Leon's intellectual counterpunches were unexpected, unsettling. "Truth, you talk about truth," Hammer scoffed, gesturing around the cramped library. "Truth is, you're locked up, and we run this place. You're nothing." Just then, a voice, raspy and low, cut through the exchange. "Nothing. Sounds like someone's been reading too much of the warden's propaganda." An older black inmate, known only as Pops, emerged from behind a towering stack of law books. Pops was a watch for quiet authority, his lean frame belying a sharp mind and eyes that had seen too much. He carried himself with a weary dignity, and though he belonged to no single gang, he commanded a grudging respect from many due to his extensive knowledge of prison regulations and his uncanny ability to see through deception. He had observed Leon's steadfast composure during the public humiliations, the quiet resilience that defied the warden's expectations. Hammer's head snapped towards Pops, his brow furrowed. "Stay out of this, old man." Pops merely smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his lips. "It's already in, son, like the air we breathe in this cage. And when you breathe it long enough, you start to see the strings." He turned his gaze to Leon, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "The Major here, he ain't just reading about war. He's living it. And some wars ain't fought with fists, eh?" "Major," Leon nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. Pops's intervention was subtle, but effective. He hadn't sided with Leon directly, but he had shifted the dynamic, injecting a layer of intellectual challenge into Hammer's brute force approach. This was Leon's opportunity. "Indeed," Leon said, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. He lowered his book, his eyes sweeping across Hammer and his men, then briefly to a guard posted near the entrance, who seemed deliberately oblivious. "This whole place is a battlefield, Hammer, and the real enemy isn't each other. It's the hand that feeds us scraps while it hoards the feast." His words hung in the stale air. It wasn't a direct accusation against Hale, but a veiled reference to the systemic inequalities and manipulations that affected all inmates. Regardless of their affiliations, it was a tactical strike, a seed of doubt planted in fertile and frustrated ground. Hammer's eyes narrowed, searching Leon's face for a weakness, an opening. He was a creature of impulse, trained to react to direct confrontation, not cryptic challenges to his worldview. "What are you talking about, Major?" Hammer growled, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You got some secret intel about chow hall portions now." Leon's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "No secret intel, Hammer, just common sense. Look around. We fight amongst ourselves for crumbs, while the warden makes sure his favored few get their share of the pie. And how does he do that? By keeping us divided. By telling you that he is on your side, while he quietly undermines your own. Think about who really benefits from all this infighting. Is it you, Hammer, or is it the man who sits in his office, watching us tear each other apart?" He paused, letting the implications sink in. The dramatic tension was palpable. Hammer's face, usually a mask of aggressive confidence, showed a flicker of confusion, then suspicion. Leon was suggesting that Hale wasn't a benevolent ally, but a manipulator, using them as much as he was using Leon. It was a plot twist that challenged the very foundation of Hammer's loyalty to Hale. Other inmates, drawn by the unusual confrontation, began to gather, their eyes shifting between Leon, Hammer, and Pops. Pops cleared his throat, a subtle emphasis on Leon's words. Smart man knows when he's being played. Son, smarter man knows when to stop playing along. The guard near the entrance, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, finally moved, his posture stiffening. Hale's control, normally absolute, was being subtly challenged not by a physical brawl, but by an intellectual confrontation. Hammer, unaccustomed to such nuanced attacks, felt his authority waver. He was caught between his conditioned hatred for Leon and the unsettling logic of Leon's argument. The implication that Hale was using him was a direct assault on his pride. "You're just trying to turn us against each other." "Major," Hammer stammered, his voice losing some of its usual force. "Am I, Maine?" Leon countered, his voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of unassailable logic. "Or is that what he wants you to think, who benefits from us being distracted? From us not looking at the bigger picture, who gets to keep their secrets safe when we're too busy fighting over broken blankets and half-eaten trays?" The tension crackled. Leon had thrown down a gauntlet, not of violence, but of truth. He had taken Hale's insidious manipulation of racial and gang dynamics and turned it back on itself. Exposing the strings, it was a direct, indirect act of resistance, an attempt to sow discord in Hale's carefully constructed system of control. Hammer, for the first time, looked genuinely uncertain. Leon's calm defiance, coupled with Pops's subtle reinforcement, had created a fissure in the prison's carefully maintained hierarchy. The silent witnesses in the library looked at Leon not just as an inmate, but as a man who dared to speak uncomfortable truths, a man who saw the bigger game being played, and wasn't afraid to expose it. This was the first stone thrown, the first crack in the seemingly impenetrable wall of Hale's control. The harsh fluorescent lights of the black stone penitentiary's main common room cast long, skeletal shadows. This was not a routine gathering. Warden Travis Hale, his face a mask of calculated fury, had convened what he termed an internal security review. But everyone present, from the rows of silent inmates to the squad of heavily armed guards, knew its true purpose, the final public degradation of Major Leon Carter. Hale had chosen this space, normally used for weekly inmate briefings, for its capacity to hold a large audience, ensuring maximum impact. His voice, amplified by a crackling microphone, boomed across the room, laced with a venomous condescension. "Inmate Carter," Hale began, his eyes fixed on Leon, who stood rigidly at attention before a makeshift podium. "Your continuous defiance of prison regulations, your blatant insubordination, and your attempts to incite discord among the inmate population will not be tolerated. This institution operates on order, discipline, and respect." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, then leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "Something a traitor like you clearly knows nothing about." A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled inmates. Among them, Pops, his eyes sharp and observant, shifted his weight, his gaze unwavering on Leon. Near the back, a new face in the crowd, a young, nervous-looking prison clerk named Sarah, clutching a clipboard, seemed to be observing the proceedings with an unusual intensity. Unbeknownst to Hale, Sarah had been contacted by an anonymous source, a former colleague of Leon's who had suspected foul play, and was subtly trying to gather information for an investigative journalist. "Your military record, Carter," Hale continued, his voice rising, "once touted as exemplary, now serves only as a testament to how far a man can fall, from decorated officer to common criminal. A puppet of those who sought to undermine our nation. It is a disgrace. A disgrace to the uniform, to the flag, and to every honest man who serves." Hale's words were laced with racist undertones, painting Leon as not just a criminal, but a symbol of racial betrayal. He gestured dismissively at Leon, as if swatting away a fly. "You speak of truth. You speak of honor. You who sold out your country for a handful of silver. The accusation of treason, a lie crafted to justify Leon's imprisonment, was now being wielded as a bludgeon. designed to strip him of any remaining shred of public respect. Hale's intention was clear: to provoke Leon into an outburst, to confirm the narrative of an unstable, dangerous man. Leon remained motionless, his face impassive, his eyes locked on Hale. He let the warden's words wash over him, recognizing them as the predictable onslaught of a desperate man. This was the moment, the culmination of Hale's systematic abuse, the public display of his power, and Leon had prepared for it. Warden Hale. Leon's voice was calm, cutting through the thick atmosphere of tension. You speak of truth, but you peddle in lies. You speak of honor, but you traffic in corruption. Hale's eyes narrowed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He hadn't expected Leon to remain so composed, let alone to return fire with such directness. Watch your tone, inmate, Hale snapped, his pretense of calm slipping. There's nothing to watch, Warden, Leon countered, his voice gaining a quiet but firm intensity. Only what you choose to ignore. You parade me here, a traitor, while the real traitors operate freely, protected by men like you. You accuse me of selling out my country, yet you profit from the very same illicit arms trade that led to my wrongful imprisonment. The common room fell into a stunned silence. This was not a denial. This was a direct counteraccusation, laced with specific knowledge that resonated with the inmates who had heard rumors, and particularly with Sarah, whose hand tightened on her clipboard. Hale's face blanched, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his features before he regained his composure. Preposterous! These are the baseless ravings of a desperate man. You have no proof. Proof, Leon's voice was chillingly calm. I have proof, and so do you. Warden, you just keep it buried under layers of official deceit and inmate blood. He took a step forward, his eyes boring into Hale's. Do you deny, Warden, Warden, that you personally oversaw the transfer of seized military-grade explosives, specifically the M112 C4 demolition charges, from the federal impound in Fort Bragg on the night of November 17th, 2 years ago, a transfer that never appeared in any official inventory, and coincided precisely with a shipment of untraceable weapons to a known extremist group in the Sahel region? The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The date, the specific type of explosive, the impound location. These were details that would only be known to someone intimately involved in the conspiracy, or someone with access to highly classified intelligence. Hale, caught off guard, stammered, his composure completely shattered. He knew these details were not publicly known, certainly not to a man supposedly stripped of all intelligence access. That's classified information, Hale roared, his face turning crimson. His reaction was not one of denial, but of outrage that such specific knowledge was being revealed. It was an admission in itself. How could you possibly know that? Who told you that? No one told me, Warden, Leon said, his voice now a quiet, powerful force. I saw it, I documented it, and I was framed to keep me silent about it. The same way you now use your authority to silence anyone who dares to speak the truth in this institution. He pointed a finger at Hale, his gaze unwavering. Your entire prison, Warden, is built on a foundation of your own corruption. You allow gangs to flourish to distract from your own dealings. You punish those who seek justice to protect your illicit profits. And you tried to break me, to brand me a traitor, to cover your own tracks. The room erupted in whispers. Many inmates, who had long suspected Hale's favoritism towards certain gangs and his oppressive policies, now saw a direct link to a larger, more sinister scheme. The Aryan Brotherhood members, including Hammer, looked at Hale with new eyes, a dawning realization that they too were merely pawns in a much bigger, dirtier game. Sarah, the clerk, scribbled furiously on her clipboard, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and professional excitement. She had found her story, a damning piece of emerging evidence. Hale, cornered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, lunged forward, grabbing the microphone stand. Guards, get him out of here. He's delusional. He's fabricating lies. His voice was ragged, desperate, but Leon stood firm, his gaze unflinching. He had achieved his objective, not just to speak the truth, but to expose Hale's direct, terrified reaction to it, making him a witness to his own unraveling. The common room was a powder keg, the silence broken only by the warden's increasingly frantic shouts and the growing buzz of revelation among the inmates. Leon had not only confronted the race's power, he had exposed its vulnerability, proving that even behind bars, the truth could be a silent, potent weapon. The climactic confrontation was far from over, but the first shot had been fired, and the witnesses were beginning to see the true enemy. The common room plunged into a volatile silence, thick with shock and dawning comprehension. Hale's frantic shouts for the guards to remove Leon were met with a momentary, almost imperceptible hesitation from the officers. They exchanged uneasy glances, their training vying with the unsettling implications of Leon's detailed accusation. The specific mention of the M112C4 charges and the precise date had ripped through the facade of Hale's authority like a sonic boom. This wasn't just an inmate making wild claims. This was a former Delta Force major, speaking with the chilling certainty of one who had been there. Before the guards could physically move, the massive steel door at the back of the common room hissed open. Two stern-faced men in dark suits, flanked by a squad of federal marshals, strode purposefully into the room. Their sudden appearance, unannounced and with such a heavy presence, instantly shifted the power dynamic. The federal marshals, their faces grim, moved with practiced efficiency to surround Hale, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons. One of the men in suits, a woman with piercing eyes and an air of quiet authority, held up an official-looking document. "Warden Travis Hale," she announced, her voice calm but resonant. "I am Agent Anya Sharma of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are hereby suspended from your duties, effective immediately. We have reason to believe you are involved in a conspiracy involving arms trafficking and obstruction of justice." Hale's face, already a patchwork of fear and rage, turned ashen. He stammered, "This is outrageous. This is a setup, that inmate, he's a liar." He pointed a trembling finger at Leon, who stood unflinching, his eyes fixed on Sharma. Agent Sharma didn't even glance at Leon. Her gaze remained fixed on Hale. "Mr. Hale, you are ordered to surrender your sidearm and accompany us immediately. Any resistance will be met with force." The public, swift arrest of the warden sent a seismic shockwave through Blackstone Penitentiary. The guards, who moments before had been ready to obey Hale's every command, now stood stunned, watching their commander being stripped of his authority. The inmates, a collective gasp rippling through their ranks, watched with a mixture of disbelief and a flicker of vindication. For years, Hale had been an untouchable deity, his word law, his power absolute. Now, he was being led away, his face contorted in a mask of impotent fury. As Hale was escorted out, still sputtering threats and denials, the silence in the common room was profound. The other man in a dark suit, equally grim-faced, approached Leon. "Major Carter," he said, his voice flat, "we understand you have information pertinent to this investigation. You will be taken to a secure, isolated unit for your own safety, effective immediately. This is not punitive. It is for your protection." Leon nodded, a barely perceptible acknowledgement. He knew this was the inevitable next step. His revelations had ignited a fire, and the immediate consequences were a protective isolation that also served to keep him under control. As he was led away by two of the marshals, he passes Sarah, the prison clerk. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Sarah gave him a quick, almost imperceptible nod. Clutching her clipboard tighter, the message was clear: she had his back. The evidence was out. The news of Warden Hale's suspension and subsequent detention for questioning spread through the prison like wildfire. The immediate effect was a destabilization of the established pecking order. Officer Miller and other guards loyal to Hale found themselves under intense scrutiny, their once unquestioned authority now undermined. Internal affairs officers swarmed the prison, interviewing staff and inmates, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the upheaval. The system was reacting, slowly, but decisively, among the inmates. The reaction was complex. Many felt a grim satisfaction at Hale's downfall, a sense of overdue justice. The Aryan Brotherhood, particularly Hammer, found themselves in a precarious position. Hale's protection had vanished, and Leon's accusation had exposed them as mere tools in the warden's game. The carefully cultivated racial animosity that Hale had fostered began to fray, replaced by a dawning realization that they had all been played. Hammer, usually quick to aggression, seemed subdued, his bravado replaced by a simmering resentment not towards Leon, but towards the man who had used him. Outside the prison walls, Sarah moved with a quiet urgency. As soon as her shift ended, she made a hushed call to Tanya, the investigative journalist she'd been in contact with for weeks. Tanya, a tenacious reporter also with the nose for systemic injustice, had been building a case against Hale for months, based on whispers and anonymous tips, but had lacked concrete evidence. Sarah's call, detailing Leon's explosive confrontation and Hale's panicked reaction, provided the irrefutable proof she needed. "This is it, Tanya," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and apprehension. "He named specific dates, specific ordnance, and the FBI just walked in and took Hale. It's real, all of it." Within hours, Tanya was on the phone with her editor, the story rapidly taking shape. The initial breaking news alerts hit the wire by nightfall. Blackstone warden suspended amidst explosive allegations of arms trafficking. The headlines were vague at first, legally cautious, but the implication was clear. The public response was immediate and varied. Initial skepticism mingled with a surge of outrage. Social media buzzed, dissecting the sparse details. Civil rights organizations issued statements, demanding a full, transparent investigation, particularly given the implications of racial bias in the prison's administration. Leon Carter's name, once synonymous with traitor, began to resurface, tinged now with a growing curiosity, a nascent sense of injustice. The quiet, disciplined soldier had struck a blow not just for himself, but for a community desperate for answers, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. Leon found himself in a solitary confinement unit, starker and more sterile than his previous cell. This was not a punitive measure, as the marshals had stated, but a strategic move by the authorities to control the flow of information and protect a key witness. The walls were thicker, the reinforced door devoid of a viewing slot, and the single, high window showed only a sliver of perpetually gray sky. Meals were slid through a small slot, and communication was strictly limited to occasional, terse exchanges with the federal agents who now managed his incarceration. It was isolating, yet Leon felt a strange sense of liberation. The public humiliation, the systemic abuse, these daily battles were over. Now the fight was larger, external, and he finally had allies, however distant they might seem. The first interaction beyond his basic needs came from Agent Sharma, a woman whose stoic demeanor masked a sharp intellect. She visited him daily, not for interrogation, but for information, meticulously documenting his account. Leon, with his Delta Force training, understood the value of precise detail. He recounted the Syrian operation, the discovery of the arms pipeline, the betrayal by Commander Thorne, and the specific individuals involved in the conspiracy. He meticulously described the coded communications, the logistics of the arms transfers, and the intricate web of corruption that stretched far beyond Blackstone Penitentiary. He spoke of the emotional toll, the calculated threats against his family, and his strategic decision to endure the framing to serve and expose the truth. This was his story, finally being heard, not by his captors, but by those who genuinely sought justice. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Tanya, the investigative journalist, was working relentlessly. Sarah, the prison clerk, had become her indispensable source, risking her career, perhaps even her safety, by leaking internal documents and detailed accounts of Hale's corruption and Leon's public confrontation. Tanya corroborated these leaks with her own independent research, digging into Hale's past, unearthing suspicious financial transactions, and cross-referencing military supply chains. The initial breaking news of Hale's suspension morphed into a full-blown investigative series. Tanya's first major article, The Shadow of Blackstone: How a Decorated Major Became a Scapegoat for a Corrupt System, hit the front page of a national newspaper and quickly went viral online. It painted a harrowing picture of Leon's false imprisonment, detailing the systematic racism he faced within the prison, and tying Hale's local corruption to a larger, more sinister arms trafficking conspiracy. Tanya used vivid language to describe Leon's quiet endurance, his unyielding integrity in the face of public degradation. She quoted anonymous sources, Sarah's carefully worded observations, and hinted at the specific evidence Leon had revealed, creating a compelling narrative of a modern-day hero caught in a web of governmental deceit. Online forums became platforms for heated debates. Many expressed outrage at the racial profiling inherent in the prison's treatment of Leon, arguing that his race made him a convenient target for a system designed to suppress and control. Others shared their own experiences of systemic injustice, drawing parallels to Leon's story. The story tapped into a deep vein of public distrust in governmental institutions and resonated with those who felt marginalized and unheard. Tanya's subsequent articles broadened the scope, revealing the intricate details of the illicit arms pipeline, referencing anonymous intelligence sources who had long suspected such an operation. She subtly wove in hints from Leon's testimony, describing how a highly decorated operative had stumbled upon the conspiracy and been systematically silenced. While she couldn't explicitly name Leon as her source or reveal his testimony to the FBI, her articles crafted a compelling, evidence-based narrative that mirrored the truth he had shared. The public outcry was not just emotional, it was organized. Online petitions demanding Leon's release garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Grassroots campaigns sprang up, advocating for prison reform and accountability for corrupt officials. Lawyers, sensing a landmark case, began to offer their pro bono services. Leon, isolated in his cell, was unaware of the groundswell of support, but his story, meticulously amplified by Tanya and Sarah, was rebuilding his reputation, piece by painstaking piece. His silence and confinement was no longer a sign of defeat, but a powerful echo of his enduring courage, a testament to the fact that even behind bars, truth could find its way out and ignite a movement for justice. The fight was far from over, but the tides of public opinion were beginning to turn, finally washing away the false narrative that had shackled him for so long. The intricate web of corruption began to unravel with relentless speed. Warden Travis Hale, facing irrefutable evidence provided by Leon's testimony and Sarah's courageous leaks, alongside Tanya's tenacious reporting, quickly crumbled under the weight of federal interrogation. His confession, albeit coerced and self-serving, provided the crucial missing links, directly implicating Commander David Thorne and several high-ranking government officials in the clandestine arms trafficking ring and the framing of Major Leon Carter. The sheer audacity of the conspiracy sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of power. Leon found himself in a solitary confinement unit, starker and more sterile than his previous cell. This was not a punitive measure, as the marshals had stated, but a strategic move by the authorities to control the flow of information and protect a key witness. The walls were thicker, the reinforced door devoid of a viewing slot, and the single high window showed only a sliver of perpetually gray sky. Meals were slid through a small slot, and communication was strictly limited to occasional, terse exchanges with the federal agents who now managed his incarceration. It was isolating. Yet Leon felt a strange sense of liberation. The public humiliation, the systemic abuse, these daily battles were over. Now the fight was larger, external, and he finally had allies, however distant they might seem. The first interaction beyond his basic needs came from Agent Sharma, a woman whose stoic demeanor masked a sharp intellect. She visited him daily, not for interrogation but for information, meticulously documenting his account. Leon, with his Delta Force training, understood the value of precise detail. He recounted the Syrian operation, the discovery of the arms pipeline, the betrayal by Commander Thorne, and the specific individuals involved in the conspiracy. He meticulously described the coded communications, the logistics of the arms transfers, and the intricate web of corruption that stretched far beyond Blackstone Penitentiary. He spoke of the emotional toll, the calculated threats against his family, and his strategic decision to endure the framing to survive and expose the truth. This was his story, finally being heard, not by his captors, but by those who genuinely sought justice. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Tanya, the investigative journalist, was working relentlessly. Sarah, the prison clerk, had become her indispensable source, risking her career, perhaps even her safety, by leaking internal documents and detailed accounts of Hale's corruption and Leon's public confrontation. Tanya corroborated these leaks with her own independent research, digging into Hale's past, unearthing suspicious financial transactions, and cross-referencing military supply chains. The initial breaking news of Hale's suspension morphed into a full-blown investigative series. Tanya's first major article, "The Shadow of Blackstone: How a Decorated Major Became a Scapegoat for a Corrupt System," hit the front page of a national newspaper and quickly spread across online platforms. It painted a harrowing picture of Leon's false imprisonment, detailing the systematic racism he faced within the prison, and tying Hale's local corruption to a larger, more sinister arms trafficking conspiracy. Tanya used vivid language to describe Leon's quiet endurance, his unyielding integrity in the face of public degradation. She quoted anonymous sources, Sarah's carefully worded observations, and hinted at the specific evidence Leon had revealed, creating a compelling narrative of a modern-day hero caught in a web of governmental deceit. The article included a compelling photograph of Leon from his Delta Force days, a younger, vibrant man in uniform, his eyes sharp and resolute. The contrast with the public image of him as a traitor was stark and emotionally charged. This visual, combined with Tanya's powerful prose, resonated deeply with the public. Online discussions erupted. People across social media platforms engaged in widespread discourse, questioning the official narrative and seeking justice for Leon. Initial skepticism transformed into a growing sense of outrage. Veterans groups, civil liberties organizations, and racial justice advocates rallied behind his cause, demanding a full, transparent investigation and his immediate release. Online forums became platforms for heated debates. Many expressed outrage at the racial profiling inherent in the prison's treatment of Leon, arguing that his race made him a convenient target for a system designed to suppress and control. Others shared their own experiences of systemic injustice, drawing parallels to Leon's story. The narrative tapped into a deep vein of public distrust in governmental institutions and resonated with those who felt marginalized and unheard. Tanya's subsequent articles broadened the scope, revealing the intricate details of the illicit arms pipeline, referencing anonymous intelligence sources who had long suspected such an operation. She subtly wove in hints from Leon's testimony, describing how a highly decorated operative had stumbled upon the conspiracy and been systematically silenced. While she couldn't explicitly name Leon as her source or reveal his testimony to the FBI, her articles crafted a compelling, evidence-based narrative that mirrored the truth he had shared. The public outcry was not just emotional, it was organized. Online petitions demanding Leon's release garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Grassroots campaigns sprang up, advocating for prison reform and accountability for corrupt officials. Lawyers, sensing a landmark case, began to offer their pro bono services. Leon, isolated in his cell, was unaware of the groundswell of support, but his story, meticulously amplified by Tanya and Sarah, was rebuilding his reputation. Piece by painstaking piece, his silence in confinement was no longer a sign of defeat, but a powerful echo of his enduring courage, a testament to the fact that even behind bars, truth could find its way out and ignite a movement for justice. The fight was far from over, but the tides of public opinion were beginning to turn. finally washing away the false narrative that had shackled him for so long.